So hi everybody and welcome back to our C++ tutorial series for absolute beginners. This is video 83 and in this video we are talking about functions. Functions are very powerful. It makes our life easier, but on the other hand we have to track a little bit more. That's why we have to learn them very good. And let's get started. First of all, we will learn in the next videos two kind of functions. One function is a function with a return type and then a function without a return type. These are the two functions which we are going to learn, and let's get started with the function without a return type. So, but before we start, we can see here already a function, and this is this int main function. This is a special function actually because it is the start point of our program. So the compiler will jump here and execute our code, what we have written from this in this function int main. So you see this int main function has the functionality to start our program. So what I mean with that, if you are finished and created an exe file, this has the functionality and say here the program starts from here, and that's why they use here also a function. So that makes sense. But we are not starting with a function with return type because this int main is a function which has a return type. Where is this return type? Here, the start point. This is a type. We know this is an integer primitive type, and when it's written with a function, it is meant to be the return type. And why it's called the return type? Because this function needs normally also a keyword, which is this return, and then it needs another value, and this value must match to this type. So for example, this type says I want a return type of a integer, and that means only numbers are allowed. So don't give me characters or words or decimal point number, something like that. And then if you find a value which matches this type, you can return it. So, but this we are not creating, and this was special, this start point, because we can avoid this one, which just delete this one and still works. But the functions which we are going to create must have this keyword return if it's a function with a return type. So that's it for this kind of stuff. But in this video, I want to start with the easier function, which is the function without a return type, which means we don't need this one and we don't need a type. But the problem is I just can't write it like this. So for example, I just can't avoid this place here in front. I have to write there something like that indicates this is a function without a return type. And in our case, this new word, or let's say this new type, is a function, is a type of the name void. This is a special type and it has different meaning in different places, but if you use it with a function, it means this one has no return type. It is just void. So all time when you read something like void means no return type in a function. And let's continue. So now I say, okay, this will be a function without a return type. The next step is we have just to find a name. Okay, let's find a name. I call my function, and the name must again very descriptive. You should read this function name if it's possible one time and know what the function does. So I want that this function which we are going to create to just print out my name. So I say print out my name. So this function will print out my name, and then I need this round brackets. They are very important. But we will not talk about this round brackets in this video because they are so important that we need another video for it. So but we continue. But before we continue, you see here something different than here. This function which I created, I mean this function name which I wrote here, this one is actually not the same like here. I mean, you see, they write all function names with lower letters, right, at the start point. And I use again my convention, which is just write every word which is a separate word as the starting point with a capital letter. And this is for me easier than thinking about a function which has only lower letters or the camel style letter, because this one works ultimately for all things. But of course you should use the official, let's say the official version of C++, which is function names with lower letter, and read this again in a book how to use that. But of course you can use this one too. In my case I use this style because this one is easier for me and in general, and that's why I use the principle. Use that what it is easy makes the code easy, and this one makes the code very easy because I don't care if it's a lower letter and comes then a bigger letter or something else. I just write every letter with the name big. So that's enough for name. We continue, and now I stop. Wait a minute, why I'm stopping here? When we look this int main function here, it continues here. Why I'm stopping here, the reason for this is the first part of a function, and if I stop here, this part is called the function declaration. Let's write it. Okay, function declaration. Okay, we have now the function declaration here, but we want not a function declaration, we want a full function. So this is just a part of it. I want a full function. Okay, what I'm going to do, I take the function declaration and I just continue. And what I have to add is just to make it a full function, this curly brackets here. All right, let's add them. And after I add them, I have now a full function, almost a full function. There's one more step, but let's write here what this function is. Now, because it becomes a full function, it has a special name. It is called a function definition. All right, and why I said this is still not a full function, the reason for that is it is already a function definition, which means a full function. But normally it is very important that you write anything in it. Of course, you can have it empty. And in our case, you must write the final code as well in it, because this one is important for the compiler so he can, behind the scenes, so the technical term, which is not interesting for us, the compiler will reserve storage and something like that, but that's not very important. The only thing which is important for us, we provide here our final task, and which is, it says here, print out my name. And how I'm printing this out, very simple, std cout, what we already did, and here is my name, coder. All right, so but when we watch this place here, there is a red tribble or whatever, and it indicates an error. And even if it indicates an error, I will use it. Before I use it, I comment this part here, the declaration, because I want to show you something, and intentionally let's make an error and say no. So now we learn also a little bit reading function errors, because this is also very important. Let's get started. So here, this line is very important, and we see it starts here saying print out my name. Okay, definitely something what I created is an error. Okay, it says here local function definitions are illegal. Okay, let's translate this sentence here a little bit, and it says function definitions. All right, that's very important. This is a function definition, because I just said if you write a declaration plus the body we have a function definition. Okay, we found this part are illegal. Okay, that we know that is illegal, but what is this local here again? Local means to what? Local to what? It's again with scope, and this function is written in int main, right? So I can close this one here, and we see this function what I have written is local towards int main function. And this line of code says a function definition is illegal when we write it in another function. But we have here a problem. Till now, in our all videos, what I introduced you, there was no problem. We wrote almost all in int main. Not all, there were some special cases, for example, these libraries or global variables. But now we can't use executed code. But the most time when we executed the code, we wrote it between int main, because the compiler will read it, right? And now we can't do this. So what we have to do is find a solution. But before we find a solution, let me show you one more thing. Let's go for this one, uncomment this one, save this, start this arrow again. It makes again error. And interesting about this one is the declaration here was not defined as an error, right? So only a definition, because here it says only function definitions are not allowed in other functions, so not in but a function declaration is allowed. That's interesting and important later perhaps. So I comment this part again away. Control comment the other way around. All right, let's find now a solution that this line of code disappears. We find it, and actually it's very easy. If it's illegal here, then we put it out, right? Not in this function. And we are going to do this actually, but we have a choice where we put it, below or above. And like the variables which we put above work very well, but I would rather go down. And why is that? Because normally I start on top with my main, then I add this function, and perhaps later I add another function and another function, and yeah, we work most time from top to down. And let's see what happens. Let's do this and make you faster format, save this and start. And we have, oh, it worked? Or let's watch this a little bit closer. First of all, good news, no complaint, the line is gone. But this one is actually not right. This is here's a tricky error. What is the error actually? The compiler says no error. And now we need a little bit background knowledge about the compiler. And I will not explain it now in detail, because now you have to read about the compiler a little bit online or in a good C++ book, how this all works. I will explain it in a very practical way, which means not accurate and just that you understand it. So what happens here is, like I said, the int main is where our compiler will jump in, right? And then it will read here our lines, line by line, what we have written. For example, it reads this comment and then says, I can ignore it, it's a comment, I can ignore it, it's a comment. And then it reads this return 0, which indicates the end of our int main, because if it reads return, the compiler says, okay, this is the finish point, and I return this value here. And then this compiler reaches this endpoint, and after this point the compiler says, I'm finished. This program, this whole program which was started, is finished. So this is very important. This int main is not only the start point, it is also at the same time the end point of our program. It starts here at this point and it ends at this point, which means the compiler will not go to this point and read this kind of stuff, and so on, right? This is the problem. And how we can solve this now? How we can say to compiler, hey compiler, here is another stuff, you should read this too. And there are not one way, actually, there are many different ways how we can accomplish it. But one way is just say, call the compiler, say to the compiler, go to this function here. So I copy this one, I paste this here, and this what I did now here is called a function call. Okay, I write it function call. And a function call means the compiler will read now this line of code, and then it will check, it makes a lookup and says, do I know this name here? If I know this, then the compiler will jump to this function here. So it jumps out of his own oh, sorry. So it is, sorry, no. So it jumps out of its own function and start to execute this line of code. First it goes here, then it starts executing this code, then it reaches this end curly brackets, and after this one it jumps back to this function again, but it continues then with the next line. So that's important to know, how the compiler will jump around. And let's see if this works. And we start, and oh no, we have again an error. What's the problem now? Let's check. So we read again, and it says sorry, it says identifier not found. First of all, this print out my name is an identifier, which means an identifier is just a name. So, and there are millions of identifiers, so in this case it's a function name. It's not found. Wait a minute, why it is not found? The problem here is, now we go a little bit to theory, and again I will not explain this absolute correct, because you read again a little bit this kind of stuff in online books, and so in a good place. But I will give you this practical explanation, which is not absolute accurate, but it works perfect. So what happens here is the compiler says, at this point, I just don't know this name. Make this name here, please, visible for me. And how we can make this name visible? There are different solutions, and one way is just to push this up. I just push this up and save this here on top. So, and then the question is, wait a minute, what is here the difference about this position and this position? I don't get it, right? It makes no sense, because the compiler starts anyway here, right? And now comes the theory part. That's actually right and not right at the same time. The compiler starts at this point, that's right. He starts to executing your code at this point. Yes, at this point he starts, it jumps in main, executes all what he can read. But the compiler, when you press here start, actually has phases. I don't know, around 8 phases. And before the compiler starts, which is phase 8 or whatever, phase 9, the last one, there are other phases which scans your code. So with other words, there's a phase 1, it's scanning your code, then something like that till this point. And then phase 2, it scans again your code till this point. And then phase 3 and phase 4 and whatever. Sorry. And one of these phases who scans your code will scan this one, and this phase will note this name here in a table, and after this one, later when the compiler starts executing this code here, the compiler will look up in this table if this phase in which it was scanned this name here. So this one is scanned, and then the compiler knows, yes, I have scanned this one and I can use it. And that's the problem with this position. At the end, for example, this works not. The compiler starts here, and these phases translate all what they have from top to this point. But read this well, a little bit more accurate in the online books how this works. But what you should know is there are phases, and the compiler actually, this is all the phases are not even interesting. The only thing what you should know is if you want call this function, just know that this definition here is visible before you call it. That's actually the practical use. We have just make this visibility visible before we call it. But let me show you these phases a little bit on this page, but as a beginner I recommend not you to read this page, because this is not meant for beginners, because you see they are using here many explanations, which is for advanced readers. We have not even discussed all what they are showing here, but that's not very interesting. Interesting is anyway this phases. It's called phase of translation, right? And if you read this, the C++ source file is processed by the compiler as if they followed phases taking place as the following phases take place in this exact order. So we have here phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and phase 4, and phase 5, phase 6, and you see till phase 9. We have here many phases. But important is phase, for example. Let me show you this one. Of course, all are important, but for us important is, for example, this phase 3. And here on A it says header names such as IO stream or myself. This phase here is scanned these libraries. You remember when I said these libraries we include, and there is something, a translation unit who scanned this, and then we can use, for example, a string without including this one here. So if I want to use here, for example, a string std, let me show you this std string and then my name, and you see for this kind of stuff we had to include this one here on top, and the compiler reads still here, the compiler is still here, but because this phase scanned this one before the compiler was here, it knows it can use the string. And similar, it's now with our function. The function which we are calling, the compiler knows that this function exists here because the phase scanned this one and noted this one in a table. And you can see, for example, if I go on here, here are the identifiers, and this was our problem, right? So let me show you this one again. That was our error. Yes, when I start this one again. Yes, here, and it says identifier not found. This one, B, identifiers phase 3, will check all the identifiers which we have, but here at this point, it is not here. It scans till this point where you call it. So all things till this point, or read this a little bit more accurate how this works. And in a practical way, we are only interested, yes, till this point I have defined this definition. I need the function definition before I can call it. That is the practical use. And this background you can read, and don't read it on this page. It's too complicated for beginners. Find a good book where a professional write his knowledge down in a readable way for beginners. All right, let's continue. So that was one thing, but there are actually more ways to make this visible. This is one way, that you just bring the definition here on top. Another way is now I bring this definition again on the bottom, and I said, wait a minute, we said that's not possible because it's not visible. Yes, but there is one trick to make this function, which is now on the bottom, visible at this point. It's a special, yeah, it's a little bit special, but you can use it. And what is that? It's very simple actually. It is just, you just use the function declaration. And if you use the function declaration before you call this one, it will be possible. So for example, here we have a function declaration. I uncomment this fast. And now I have, of course, this one I have to comment again. All right. So here I use this function declaration. And this declaration, function declaration, is again something like this identifier. And because it makes for the compiler visible, it checks again here the face, it checks all again till this point, and it will know this name as well. And when we call it now, the function, the compiler says, okay, I know I scanned this name already, I have it in my library, and I can use this one and jump later to the definitions from here. So the compiler jumps here, says I have this, and from here it will check where the definition is, and it jumps then here down and goes here in, and later it jumps again back to our caller and continues. So this is another way to make this function name here actually visible. But this name here has a special name because you are not declaring just a function, you make it visible for the compiler. And this function is also called forward declaration. So because it has here two names, because it's general a function declaration because you need this later in another place, but here in this case you make it visible as well as for the compiler here for this point. So it is called forward declaration. So that this forward means for the compiler, so that the compiler knows this is this exists in our code, but the definition is not here. But the definition exists down here because it has an internal linkage, and this kind of stuff is again too complicated for beginners, but of course you can read this kind of stuff in the theory. And what I mean with that is, if you have here, for example, this forward declaration, you must provide this definition. For example, if I uncomment this one, let's comment this one, you see here is nothing red, but if I start this one, it's complaining. And let's read this one also a little bit so that we see all kind of errors. It says here, that's a little bit more complicated. It says here unresolved external, sorry for that, unresolved external symbols. And yeah, this it's this unresolved external symbols, and then this kind of stuff at the start is a little bit complicated. Let's skip this. Later when we go on, we will read a little bit more about these errors and so on. And just as a thumb rule, think about it when you read unresolved external symbols, means here in this case we have here declared something, but there is a linkage and found not this definition, and that's it. That's enough for it's not accurate, it's not correct explained, but it gives the problem. So that was this one. Let's make this with an uncomment so we have no problems. And of course you can this one is again local scope. Sometimes you will see this one in global scope, which means here, but not many times, but sometimes. Let's put them here as well. And now we have them on global scope here on top. And this is just scoping so that you can use this this declaration, this forward declaration, not only in this int main. For example, if you create here another function, that you can use it there too if you call it there. So I think we can stop here for the first part. And yes, if you have any questions or complaints, write it in the comments. And in the next video, we will talk about the function with the return type. And that will be easier because we have made the heavy work here. And yeah, we show only what is the difference. And yeah, with that said, bye and see you in the next video.